Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Things Episcopal, where we talk about anything and everything related to the Episcopal Church. This podcast was designed with young people in mind and as a space to learn more about the Christian faith with the Episcopal lens. So in traditionally Episcopalian greeting fashion, the Lord be with you. Hey friends, it's Claire here. I am back from maternity leave, and I have a different title this time. I am a reverend. Who let that happen? So welcome back for another season of All Things Episcopal. Like last season, we have some exciting news for you all on season 4. We're introducing a new segment of the podcast called Holy and Human, Stories from Young Adults in the Pews. As we began to discern and plan for season 4, the planning team agreed that some of the best parts of our podcast are the storytelling segments, the tell us your story or name an unfun fact about yourself. And we wanted to dedicate more time to that element of an episode of the podcast, so much so that we're creating a whole episode just for storytelling. So throughout season 4, you will hear stories from college and young adults about their experience with the Episcopal Church, their joys, their concerns, their frustration with the Church, and perhaps where we're even thriving as the Church from a millennial and Gen Z perspective. Each Holy and Human segment will be roughly 10 to 30 minutes, and we'll still have our regular episodes that talk about liturgy, sacraments, doctrine, and the theology of the Episcopal Church. That's not going away. We're just adding on to it. Additionally, and I'm really excited about this, we have a new co-host on the podcast, and more on him in a minute. So we thought we would start season 4 not only by introducing a new segment, but also introducing our new co-host and young adult missioner of the Diocese of West Missouri, Riley Brown. Riley, welcome to All Things Episcopal team, and congratulations, your story is the very first story that will be told on the new segment of All Things Episcopal, Holy and Human, Stories from Young Adults in the Pews.
Thank you, I'm honored.
So, I guess the most obvious place to start is tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you first get connected, develop a deep, meaningful relationship, hopefully, with the Episcopal Church?
Yeah, so my journey with the Episcopal Church, I think what I'm gathering is pretty similar to a lot of young adults these days. Is I was not born in the Episcopal Church, nor really anywhere near it. I come from the Assemblies of God tradition. That's the one I was born into anyway. And whenever I was in college, I decided that wasn't for me anymore. And it was a friend in college who invited me to at the time, an ACNA or ACNA, or however you want to say that, church in our area. And at that time in my life, I didn't even know what liturgy was. And I didn't even know that Christians had liturgical worship. So he brought me to that church, and I was blown away by the liturgy. And also at that time in my life, I was studying religion and theology, and I had convinced myself, given the background that I'd had, that academic theology, I'd convinced myself that theology was something that was just for church people, and it wasn't really something that, I thought I was the only one reading Karl Barth and Paul Tillich, for example. And then the priest made a point to come up to me after the service, and he asked me what I was reading, and I told him Paul Tillich, and he said, "Oh, I like Tillich," and I was floored, and he said, "But I like Barth better," and I was even more floored by that. So it was kind of, from there on, I was hooked, and I was attending that church for a little while, and then, with the ACNA, I had my own hang-ups about some of that stuff, and I ended up moving to Boston, and I was very lonely, and I was looking for a way to get plugged into the city, and I thought, what do lonely people do when they move? They join a church. And then I also thought to myself, if only there was a more progressive Anglican church, or a more progressive Anglican church in North America church. And then, light bulb moment, the Episcopal Church. So I joined the Episcopal Church. Just got super involved. And it was kind of my anchor while I was living in Boston and living away from home.
Oh my gosh, I resonate so much with what you just said. Because when I first moved to Kansas City, I only knew my bosses at the time, and my first job out of college, I knew them for about 48 hours. I left my home, I left the beaches because I'm from Florida, and left my friends on the East Coast. I came to Kansas City and literally knew no one. So to your point, what do lonely people do? They find a church, and that's exactly what I did. um, and haven't looked back. And I guess I too kind of fit in that I wasn't necessarily born into the Episcopal Church or cradle Episcopalian, but some people would say that I am because I found the church when I was 9 and I said my own baptismal vows, but I came from an unchurched family. So it's like a yes and in true Episcopal fashion. So you told us kind of like your journey into the church, and now that you've been Episcopalian for a hot minute, what does it mean to identify as an Episcopalian to you personally?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it means to me now and what it meant a lot to me back then when I came into divinity school thinking that, which is why I moved to Boston, that whatever I do, because I was in this kind of like spiritually nebulous place. I grew up in the Assemblies of God, and then whenever I was in college, I was what you'd call a nun, that's None, spiritual but not religious, all that good stuff. And I had decided by the end of my college career in Missouri, that I was ready to call myself a Christian again. And I knew that whatever I was going to become or whatever I was going to convert to, I'm saying with air quotes, was going to be something I really wanted to dive into and learn all the history about and just be wholeheartedly into that thing. And it was during that time I was reading this book that I often credit it with like my coming back to faith moment, which is funny because it's like a very dense, I shouldn't say dense, but it's a philosophy book, which it like feels very appropriate for me. But it's called Who's Afraid of Relativism by James K. A. Smith, which talks about the importance of practice and that belief is formed by our practices rather than the other way around. And so that was really on my mind. And I was like, obviously, that's so true. And I love that idea and all this stuff. And then I get to the Episcopal Church in Boston. And the first Sunday I attend church, it's like new member day. And you can come down into the basement and get like a little lecture about the history. And I learned about the middle way and the importance of practice, and that back whenever the prayer book and all in our Episcopal history, our Anglican history, it was more important for the Church of England to define how we practice rather than what we believe. And that just like was another huge light bulb moment for me where that connection just completely solidified. And that's one of the things what keeps me here, right, is on the way I've explained it to my brother-in-law is he's a baseball player. And I say, is it fair to say I'm a baseball player if I never practice or play? And he says no. And I say, is it fair to say I'm a Christian if I never practice or play? And he'll say no. So I think, practicing and play and all that stuff. And when I say play, I mean, like, I've heard someone say that liturgy is a way of playing with God. And that's something that I still hold very near and dear to my own spirituality, I guess.
That is such a rich reflection. Thank you. Related to that journey of finding meaning in liturgy and practice leading to belief, if I understand you correctly, you are the new young adult missioner for the Diocese of West Missouri. Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about. Yeah. Let's start there.
Sure. Well, I moved back. I'd actually been trying to get into discernment, and this is all wrapped up. I'm in discernment right now. And I'd been trying to get into discernment ever since I felt called to ministry during my first year of div school, but I knew that I didn't want to stay in Boston. I knew I wanted to come back home. And if I was going to be a priest or if I was going to discern or whatever, I knew I wanted to do it at home, or at least the people in Missouri, because I felt that was where I felt my call was to be. And so I spent a lot of time in Boston trying to convince people to let me begin discernment, even though I wasn't in the diocese that I would eventually be ordained in, which did not work out. All that to say, the week I moved back home, I reached out to the Episcopal Church, to the diocese, and asked if I could get a meeting with our new bishop. And I think it was the week following that I did get a meeting with her. And I told her a little bit about myself. We had a great conversation. And I can remember leaving. And the way she said it was so great. And I'm going to butcher it. But there's something about, we were saying goodbye. And she said something. And I remember her saying, we'll put you to work before then. We were talking about ordination timelines and stuff. And then she said whatever the timeline was. And she said, but we'll put you to work before then. And then, a week later or so, I get an email about this position. And it's been really exciting ever since. I was excited to hop on the opportunity. And it's been a great way to get involved in the diocese. Because like I said, I call myself an Episcopal baby because I've only been confirmed for about 3.5 years. But also, I'm very much a baby in this diocese because I moved back here. And even though Springfield is my home, or Missouri, I should say, Springfield, Missouri is my home, I didn't know anybody in the church, even though I know people here, and my family is here and everything. But I didn't know anything about the Episcopal Church in this area of the country. So it's been a great way for me to get to know people and to get involved.
Oh, fantastic. Well, welcome home, literally to your region, but also welcome home to the Episcopal Church in the Midwest. It's a great place to be. So, as you may know, the All Things Episcopal podcast was designed with young people in mind as a space to explore everything and anything related to the Episcopal Church. Oftentimes, we gain members because they're spiritually curious and or sadly recovering from church hurt. To someone who has never heard of the Episcopal Church, how would you explain the Episcopal Church to them as the young adult missioner?
Yeah, I would say that the Episcopal Church, and this is going to be redundant because of what I've said, the Episcopal Church is about practice first. And I would encourage, if you are curious about the Episcopal Church or curious about Christianity in general, to practice. Because I was in that space where, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I can affirm everything I'm saying in the Nicene Creed or in the Apostles' Creed or all this. Some of that sounds crazy to me. And my background is I did religious studies in college, so a lot of like biblical scholarship. And, there's all these things of like, I don't think the Trinity's in the Bible, all this sort of stuff that you get, bogged down if you're, listening to certain people on TikTok or if you're reading certain scholars. And I'm not saying any of that's wrong or bad or whatever, because that's me to a T. But I was in that space and I knew that if there was going to be a way for me to re-enter the space faithfully, I would have to just kind of get into the rhythm of all of that stuff. So if people were to ask what's the best way to experience the Episcopal Church, I would say it's just that, to experience it, to give it at least 2 months of going regularly and experiencing worship and really trying to get into the rhythms of it until, I can remember there was a moment when I felt people were always telling me the liturgy will get into your bones. And I was kind of like, what does that mean? And I was sitting on a bus in Boston and suddenly the words of the confession came to me. And I was like, where did that come from? And then slowly, it really does get into your bones, and the words and the ways in which having a rhythm for worship and a rhythm for life all comes together. And then I would also say that, I guess maybe as like a teaser, the Episcopal Church, I think, has a lot to offer everybody, but especially young people. I think sometimes the Episcopal Church gets a bad rap from people outside the Episcopal Church for whatever reasons, most of the time having to do with politics, etc. And I would say that the Episcopal Church has robust theology, and it is very deep, and it's not surface level. It's a very deep well to plumb, if that makes sense. So those are the two things I guess I would say.
So good. So good. So you mentioned this already, our liturgy. A core distinction of the Episcopal Church is its beautiful liturgy. I'm curious, what is your favorite part of the liturgy? And what do you struggle to connect with or feel called to understand more deeply within the liturgy?
I don't know. There's a lot of favorites. I feel like, it's weird being someone who didn't grow up in liturgical worship because all of it's so fun and like still kind of new to me. And I feel like sometimes it's a cop-out because I'll meet cradle Episcopalians who've been doing it since they were born, of like, how do you, there's almost that kind of like, I don't want to say like naivete, but the fact that everything new seems shiny and cool. And it's not extremely new, right? Because I've been in the Episcopal Church for 3.5, almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things that really stands out to me about the liturgy, and I guess is it fair to talk, is it within the rules? I should ask to talk about holidays, like
Of
Holy Week?
course. Of course. This is anything related to the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, so I would say Holy Week. Holy Week, the whole week is, I really, really love Holy Week. And I can remember I'd never heard the song Were You There When They Crucified My Lord? And the first time I heard that was at the end of Palm Sunday. And that was a very, I love that song. And discovering that song at, you know, 25, 24 years old is kind of crazy because everyone in my family knows it and they're like, you didn't know that song? But that sticks out, getting to sing that song during Holy Week. And also on the same, it's typically on Palm Sunday when we read the crucifixion, and there is we read it like a play, or we did that year. I don't think we did ever. There was 1 year where I was in Boston that we read it like a play. And I was reading along because it's a long chunk of text in the bulletin because it's like this, it's really long. And there's suddenly a bold passage that I just kind of glossed over. And I forget, bold passages are the things we say out loud. And the bolded thing was crucify him. And it was all of us saying it. And that's something I can remember just breaking down, crying whenever I had to say that. But I feel very strongly now, liturgically and theologically, that it should be us saying that because it hits so hard whenever, just that idea that the Son of God came and was killed by humanity. And I grew up in a tradition that was very much God killed Jesus so that God could like us better. So that idea that Jesus's death was us, or, us saying crucify him, I don't know, that's something that continues to really be meaningful for me.
Being, putting yourself in the story, because it is our story. As Christians, the gospel was written for us and it is our story as well. Becomes a whole lot more meaningful when you think of yourself in the crowd of saying crucify, for sure. What do you struggle to connect with in the liturgy? I'm putting you on the spot.
What do I struggle to connect with in the liturgy? I think liturgy is funny because it's sometimes, I've spent, I don't know how many minutes of this podcast, really praising the liturgy. But it's the other thing about it is sometimes it really does just feel like going through the motions. And it's kind of a great thing, but also kind of a boring thing is that it's just going through the motions. Yeah. So it kind of, for me, depends on the day. Sometimes, like I said, I'll be saying something or I'll be reading something that I've read every Sunday for the last however many years. And I'll start to get emotional and tears will well up. And that's the thing I say every Sunday. And then sometimes I'm just totally not there mentally. And I'm saying the same words. And I think, so it's not so much that there's any one moment that's hard for me to connect with. Sometimes it's hard for me to connect with the whole thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's super easy for me to connect. And I think that's why it's I like to think of it kind of like gravity, just orbiting it is what's more important than, an orbit is a very normal, regular thing, but we're still in the gravity of the thing at the center.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that you said that because growing up, I grew up in the South. Like I said, I'm originally from Florida, and I kind of had two camps of friends that were within the Christian community. Either you were Southern Baptist or you were Roman Catholic. That was kind of my friend group in terms of identity. And they both kind of came at faith with understanding of God speaking to them as if God were conversation partner, right next to you physically, and you could hear God's voice booming. And I didn't experience God that way. So I always felt like something was broken within me and that I wasn't in a meaningful relationship with God like most Christians. And so, at least the ones that I was surrounded by. I almost didn't get confirmed because I took vows really seriously. And I grew up at the cathedral in Jacksonville, Florida. And the dean at the time came in and talked to our confirmation class. And he said, I've gone through some seriously dry seasons in my priesthood to the point where I didn't know if I actually believed what, I, one, vowed to believe as a priest, and then two, as a Christian. And he said, but one of the things that I really loved is that we say the Nicene Creed, and the first word is we. So there is someone believing on your behalf when you're either completely spaced out and thinking about your grocery list, or you're going through a dry season and you have no idea what you actually believe. It is a community that is saying, we're going to journey this together. Like, we believe this, like we're giving our hearts to this, and we're going to believe for one another when we can't believe as an individual, which I thought was really beautiful. And so I loved his authenticity, and I appreciate your authenticity and transparency about, sometimes it's, not connecting completely. And then other times it just like hits you at your core and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is it,
I think too, I really like the kind of like what you're saying of like almost believing in spite of like the things that I'm feeling. It's like a very affirmative, which is the whole point of the creeds, is like, this is where I stand. This is where we stand.
Yeah.
And it's like there's definitely been times where it's like I'm talking to myself in those moments of when I don't feel like, there's a slew of things in the Nicene Creed that I'm sure plenty of Christians still struggle with and have struggled with for millennia. And there's almost something like, I don't know what the right word to use, but it's like this very kind of triumphant sometimes thing of, I don't know, but I believe, we believe, in God the Father Almighty. And sometimes it doesn't click as much as others, but I think even when it doesn't click, it's like there's still strength in it.
So true. So true. Because we can't be Christian alone. Yeah. A dear friend of mine who's a priest in the Diocese of Rochester will often say, worship has ended, our service begins. I'm curious, how does your faith influence your everyday life? Because we've talked about the liturgy, which is something that we do inside the church formally, but the liturgy is the work of the people. So how does your faith influence your everyday life outside of the church on Sundays?
Yeah.
And go.
I would say it's influenced me both in very active and our conscious and unconscious ways my entire life. And it's what led me to Div School and the work I was doing at Div School, like the part-time work while I was finishing up school. And at the time I applied to Div School, I wasn't calling myself a Christian. There's been this like unconscious kind of thing that I think I've been motivated. I remember a friend of mine at school said, talking about Christianity, it's too deep in there for me to like just pretend like it's not there. And that's kind of how I remember when he said that, like I was like, you're right. And that's how it is for me too. I think the way it is now, whenever I'm asked to give like a favorite Bible verse, I always talk about Matthew 25, which is very common. I think like if you were looking for it in the Bible, it's under a very scary heading called the Judgment of the Nations. But it's the story where Jesus says, I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was hungry and you fed me. And, this kind of back and forth of, every time you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. And for me, what that motivated in me whenever I was really, whenever that verse really started to become a core thing for me, I worked at the cathedral in Boston with their, what's called their Manna community, which they run a shelter out of their basement. And I worked there for a summer as the minister of the steps, which was their effort to bring the ministries of the church out to the people. And because of the placement of the cathedral right off of Boston Common, it was a lot of people just walking around in Boston and tourists, but it was also a lot of homeless people. And that was super formative for me. And I'm so grateful that I had that experience. But that, to me, my work with unhoused or the homeless is something that continues to be something that I see as a part of my faith, which is work that I continue to this day in my current place of employment.
Yeah. Oh. Also, I love St. Paul's. fantastic.
Shout out to St. Paul's. Shout out to Dean Anthony.
Yeah, I think I went when I was, I know, between like 15 and 17 on pilgrimage. And it was the first time I had, one, seen a pride flag in a faith-based space, and two, where we each served each other around the altar. So another youth on the youth trip that I was on would say, the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation, and the chalice was passed around to us. Like, we were all gathered around the altar. And I just thought that was like such a cool experience. I don't know if that's an actual practice on the regular at St. Paul's, but it was one of the priests at St. Paul's. I mean, this was 15 years ago. So hopefully I'm not getting a priest in trouble by saying that, but it was such a cool experience being in that space and getting to learn about the ministries that were going on there at that time. So yeah, shout out to St. Paul's Cathedral. So perhaps this is too much of an assumption here. Have you been involved in young adult ministries within the Episcopal Church specifically, and what was that like? And if you haven't, then just tell us what you dream of what they will be like, since you're the youth or young adult
Yeah, so I think the short answer is no. Within the Episcopal Church, I have not really been involved in young adult ministries until I got this role that I'm currently inhabiting, largely because, well, I became an Episcopalian in Boston, and I was in Boston until a couple months ago. But I do have some experience with young adults insofar as I am one. And I worked as a campus chaplain while I was living in Boston. So not in an Episcopal, sense, but what do young adults like to do in terms of ministry and all that good stuff? And I guess my goals for, I don't know what you'd call my tenure as a young adult missioner is, I think that young adults, at least from my own experience, want something tangible and something that is firm. And that might be different from the kind of religiosity of our parents. And I think we're kind of in a point of transition of how does the Episcopal Church offer something firm without it being exclusive, right? Or something that pushes people away. And in that sense, I think that's what I hope to bring. One of the things I've been tossing around in my own mind is like adult catechism, because I think everybody, when they go through, and I say this as someone who never went through an Episcopal confirmation. Well, I did as an adult, but I think most kids, when they go through confirmation, are doing it because their parents have told them to. And a lot of it just kind of by the time they're adults is like, well, I learned that as a kid, and it's already kind of weird information, and it doesn't stick by the time you get to college. So that leaves this opening of adult formation or adult catechesis, which is something I'm really passionate about, especially because it lets us explore like lowercase o orthodoxy, right? Which is something I'm very passionate about, because a lot of people like to say, well, you talked about, and this is relevant, you talked about the pride flag being at the cathedral. And because I was on the steps in the summer, in June, I was under that pride flag, and I had to talk to a lot of people who did not like that and did not like the church. And I've heard a great deal that the Episcopal Church is not orthodox. It is not a real church. It is a fallen church. I was given numbers for local pastors that would set me straight, all sorts of things. And one of my things is like, we are a legitimate church. We are an orthodox church. We say the Nicene Creed more than like, probably I don't want to like be facetious, but like, I would bet that we say the Nicene Creed more than Baptists or all those other kind of like evangelical, that's kind of my response. My ministry is a response to that mentality that the Episcopal Church is just NPR with a little bit of Jesus on the side or something like that.
That is so awesome. I think we just figured out the tagline of this episode. The Episcopal Church is NPR with a little bit of Jesus.
Is more than NPR with a little bit of Jesus.
Sorry, more than NPR. Sorry.
Yes, that's my whole deal. That's my shtick.
I love that. So with that being said, what would you say to someone your age, dare I say, also my age, who's curious about faith but hesitant to walk into a church?
I would say I would ask if they wanted to come with me, and I would say give it a shot. I think that, and that's one of the things, it's hard for me to talk about that because while I would say that the kind of like religiosity in churches of my youth burned me in a way, insofar as I had questions that I never got legitimate answers for. And, there's a lot of bitterness about that for me personally and all that sort of stuff. I've never been the type of person, being like a young white straight man, I should say, who's ever felt any fear to go into a church. So like, that's why I feel the only thing that I would say is I would offer to go with them if they wanted somebody to go with, and any information that they're curious about, I would tell them that they're more than welcome at the Episcopal Church. But that's always a question I feel not super well equipped to answer because I'm not someone who's dealt with a lot of religious trauma directly. Like I said, I've never been, whenever I moved to Boston, I was waltzing into every church that I found that I thought looked pretty without any inhibitions. So it's also just kind of not in my personality to be hesitant. But I don't know. That feels like a non-answer, but I hope it's helpful nonetheless.
No, I think it's an honest answer, which is what we want in the church. Honest and authentic and transparent, because that's the person that Jesus meets. Is Jesus knows everything about us, and why not be your most authentic self in the one place that you should be bringing your most authentic self to? So I love your honest answer. So we're a little over 30 minutes here with our first episode. So I'm going to wrap us up with some rapid fire questions. And you have not seen these questions, so I hope you'll indulge me a little bit. Okay. First question. High church or low church?
High church.
Favorite part of the liturgy?
Eucharist. Getting the going up. Yeah.
Scripture, tradition, or reason? Pick one.
Tradition.
Vestment color you vibe with most?
My favorite color is blue. I don't know if I've seen blue vestments, and we're in ordinary time, so I'm seeing a lot of green. So do people wear blue? Isn't it blue and purple are interchangeable? Yeah, I'm going to go with blue.
Yeah. Advent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you rather Easter Vigil or Christmas Eve service?
Oh boy. Is there candlelight carols at Christmas Eve?
I'll let you decide.
Let's say if there are candlelight carols, definitely Christmas Eve. If there's no candlelight carols, Easter Vigil.
See? Middle way right there. Perfect Episcopal answer. Church potluck must have.
I feel like every church potluck needs like a good soup.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, Riley, thank you so much for being our first story on Holy and Human Stories from Young Adults in the Pews. There we go. Long title.
Thank you.
Kicking off season 4 of All Things Episcopal. And I'm looking forward to working with you more, and really excited for your ministry as the new young adult missioner of the Diocese of West Missouri. Put that on a business card.
Right. High hopes. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and this was fun.
Well, friends, we are, like I said, kicking off season 4, and look out for more episodes that are going to be filled with story and maybe even attention grabbing. We'll see. To be determined. All right. Be well, friends. Hey, friends. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about All Things Episcopal on the Diocese of West Missouri's communication pages, please visit diowestmo.org/podcasts/. And in the Diocese of Kansas, please visit edokformation.wordpress.com/All Things Episcopal Podcast. All Things Episcopal Podcast is a production of the Diocese of West Missouri and the Diocese of Kansas, in association with Resonant Media. you.